Harlem didn't hear a scream that night. No gunshots, no sirens. Just a body hanging under a street lamp, swaying slightly in the cold air. By morning, everyone knew what it meant. The KKK had lynched Bumpy Johnson's nephew. The police closed their notebooks. The city went silent, and somewhere in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson stopped speaking. For 7 days. That silence wasn't mercy. It was a countdown. 3. The lynching of Bumpy Johnson's nephew didn't begin with noise or violence in the streets. It began with silence. A silence so heavy it pressed down on Harlem like fog rolling in off the river. By the time dawn came, word had already traveled through back hallways, barber shops, church steps, and numbers houses. A young black man had been found hanging beneath a street lamp, his body staged as a warning. No robbery, no struggle, just a rope, a broken neck, and hatred carefully delivered. Everyone understood what it meant. This wasn't a random killing. It was a message meant for Harlem itself. 3. People remembered the South. They remembered postcards of bodies hanging from trees, crowds smiling for photographs, sheriffs pretending not to see. Harlem had always believed it was different. Northern streets, big city rules, protection through numbers and pride. But that night proved something terrifying. The old hatred had followed them north. And it had crossed a line no one thought would ever be crossed. The shock wasn't just the act itself. It was who the victim was. This wasn't a gangster, not a numbers runner, not a soldier in anyone's war. He was family, blood, someone connected to the most powerful black man in Harlem. That detail turned fear into disbelief. People whispered it twice before believing it. Bumpy Johnson's nephew. If they could do this to him, what did that mean for everyone else? The streets reacted in a way outsiders didn't understand. There was no riot, no broken windows, no screaming crowds. Harlem went quiet, too quiet. Shop owners lowered their voices. Mothers pulled children inside earlier than usual. Jazz clubs kept the music low. Like the city itself was holding its breath. Silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Everyone was waiting to see who would move first. The police response made it worse. Or rather, the lack of one. No urgent investigation. No suspects rounded up. No press conference promising justice. The body disappeared, and so did the urgency. Officers shrugged. Reports were misplaced. Doors closed politely but firmly. That indifference spoke louder than sirens ever could. 3. It told Harlem that when it came to black blood, especially blood spilled by white hoods, the law would look the other way. That was when fear began to shift into something else. Anger, yes, but more than that, recognition. People understood they were standing at a crossroads. 3. Either Harlem accepted this as the new reality, or it drew a line so deep it could never be erased. The lynching wasn't just a killing. It was a test, a question thrown into the heart of the neighborhood. How much are you willing to endure? Older residents remembered stories from decades earlier. 3. When mobs ruled openly and justice depended on the color of your skin. Younger men felt something tighten in their chests, a rage mixed with helplessness. Women prayed harder. Men watched corners longer. Everyone knew that whatever happened next would define Harlem for years to come. The name Bumpy Johnson hung in the air like thunderclouds. People didn't say it loudly, but they said it often. Some believed retaliation would be immediate and bloody. Others feared nothing would happen at all. 3. That even Bumpy's reach had limits against something as ugly and protected as the KKK. That uncertainty gnawed at the city. Hope and dread walked side by side down every block. 3. What made the moment truly dangerous was not just the violence, but the symbolism. Lynching was meant to humiliate, to remind black communities of their supposed place. 3. Doing it in Harlem was an attempt to reclaim dominance, to prove that no amount of success, money, or influence could change the rules. It was an announcement that power still belonged to those willing to use terror. But Harlem was not the South. And Bumpy Johnson was not a man who forgot lessons written in blood. The lynching cracked something open. 3. Exposing wounds that never fully healed and resolve that had been waiting for a reason to harden. The city didn't know it yet, but that single act had already sealed its own consequences. 3. The rope around one young man's neck had tightened around the future of everyone involved. 3. By the time 7 days began to pass, one truth had settled deep into Harlem's bones. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about whether fear would rule the streets. 3. Or whether someone would remind the world that Harlem, for all its scars, would not bow quietly. Bumpy Johnson's silence after the lynching unsettled Harlem more than any gunshot ever could. People expected rage, chaos, an immediate response soaked in blood. That was the legend of Bumpy Johnson. Most outsiders believed in a violent kingpin who ruled by fear. But the man himself understood something far more dangerous than anger. Anger burned fast and burned out. Silence, when used correctly, made enemies reveal themselves. 3. From the moment he heard what had been done to his nephew, Bumpy chose not to speak, not to threaten, not to promise anything at all. That choice alone sent a chill through the streets. In the gangster world, silence was never empty. It was a signal. When Bumpy didn't react, people started talking. Some talked too much. Some talked to the wrong people. Rumors spread, twisted, collided, and exposed cracks that had always been hidden. Men who felt safe suddenly felt watched. Those who had played a part, directly or indirectly, couldn't sleep. Every shadow looked like judgment. Every footstep behind them sounded like the beginning of the end. Bumpy spent those days observing, not hiding. He sat in back rooms and listened more than he spoke. He let others fill the air with their fears and theories. Who was responsible? How far would Bumpy go? Would he bring the war into the streets? 3. Each question was another piece of information. Each whispered answer showed him where loyalties truly lay. Silence forced people to betray themselves. What made his patience terrifying was that it went against everything people expected. In Harlem, speed was survival. If someone disrespected you, you answered quickly or risked looking weak. But Bumpy understood that true power didn't rush. By waiting, he controlled the pace of fear. 3. His enemies were forced to live inside their own anxiety, imagining punishments worse than anything he might actually deliver. Time became a weapon, and he wielded it with precision. Behind closed doors, his mind worked constantly. Every move had to mean something. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about permanence. A violent outburst might satisfy emotion, but it wouldn't change the rules. Bumpy wanted something deeper. 3. He wanted a response that would echo, something that would be remembered long after the bodies were buried. His silence was the foundation of that plan. The police misread it. They saw no riots, no public threats, and assumed the storm had passed. They believed Harlem would swallow the injustice like it always had. That miscalculation gave Bumpy space. Space to gather names. Space to trace connections. Space to see who felt protected enough to keep operating as usual. Silence didn't draw attention. It lulled people into carelessness. Even Bumpy's own men struggled with it. Some urged action. Some feared delay. But none dared question him directly. They had seen this side of him before. 3. The calm that came before irreversible decisions. They knew that when he finally spoke, it would be with clarity, not emotion. Silence was not absence. It was preparation. During those 7 days, Harlem learned an unspoken lesson about leadership. True authority didn't shout. It didn't demand recognition. 3. It waited until everyone else was uncomfortable enough to listen. 3. Bumpy's restraint showed the neighborhood that power could be exercised without spectacle. That control didn't require constant displays of force. That understanding alone shifted the balance of the streets. For the men responsible, the silence was unbearable. Each sunrise without retaliation felt like a countdown with no clock. 3. They couldn't tell whether they had escaped notice or whether something far worse was forming. That uncertainty broke nerves, loosened tongues, and fractured alliances. Silence, in this way, became a psychological siege. No walls were breached, yet everyone inside felt trapped. By the time the 7 days ended, Bumpy's silence had done more damage than immediate violence ever could have. It stripped away illusions, exposed betrayal, and reshaped fear itself. Harlem didn't just see a gangster waiting to strike. It saw a strategist, a man who understood that the most dangerous response wasn't the fastest one, but the one that arrived fully formed, unavoidable, and final. In Harlem, betrayal was never loud. 3. It didn't announce itself with gunfire or threats. It slipped in quietly, wearing familiar faces and friendly smiles, passing through doors that only trust could open. After the lynching, Bumpy Johnson understood this better than anyone. The men who had done it didn't know Harlem the way they needed to. They didn't know routines, shortcuts, or the soft moments when people let their guard down. Someone inside had provided that knowledge. That realization shifted the hunt inward, turning friends into suspects and loyalty into something that had to be examined piece by piece. 3. Bumpy knew that an enemy on the outside was dangerous, but an enemy on the inside was lethal. Harlem ran on relationships. Numbers runners, bartenders, doormen, drivers. 3. And policemen all shared information, whether they meant to or not. A single careless word could travel faster than any bullet. During those tense days, 3. Bumpy paid attention to who grew nervous and who pretended not to care. He watched who asked too many questions and who avoided eye contact. Betrayal had a smell to it, and he had learned long ago how to recognize it. The man who cracked wasn't powerful. He wasn't important enough to make headlines. That was the most dangerous part. He was ordinary, embedded so deeply into the everyday rhythm of Harlem that no one thought to question him. He handled numbers, smiled at children, and nodded respectfully when Bumpy passed. But he had debts and fear. 3. And when the wrong men offered protection in exchange for information, he convinced himself it wasn't really betrayal. It was survival. Bumpy never confronted him directly at first. He let the man feel safe. He let him believe the storm had passed. That false sense of security was essential. People only reveal their true selves when they think they're no longer being watched. The man drank too much, talked too freely, and forgot that Harlem had ears everywhere. A name slipped, then a location, then a detail only someone close would know. Piece by piece, the truth assembled itself. When the confrontation finally came, it wasn't violent at first. It was quiet, almost respectful. A table, 2 chairs, no raised voices. Bumpy didn't accuse. He asked questions, simple ones. Questions with obvious answers. The man lied instinctively, then hesitated, then lied again. Each lie dug the hole deeper. Bumpy didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch, because silence always forced the truth closer to the surface. The betrayal wasn't just about information. It was about permission. By opening the door, the traitor had told the outside world that Harlem could be violated from within. That idea was more dangerous than the lynching itself. If left unpunished, it would rot everything Bumpy had built. Loyalty would become optional. Fear would replace respect. The streets would fracture into small, desperate alliances. Bumpy couldn't allow that. This wasn't personal anymore. It was structural. The punishment was swift, but not theatrical. No public display. No warning shots. Just removal. In Harlem, disappearance spoke louder than execution. 3. People noticed when someone stopped showing up, when a chair stayed empty, when a name was never mentioned again. The message traveled quickly and efficiently. Betrayal would not be debated. It would not be forgiven. It would simply be erased. What followed was a tightening of bonds. Those who remained understood the rules more clearly than ever. Loyalty wasn't just expected, it was enforced through certainty. 3. Bumpy's handling of the betrayal restored order without chaos. 3. It reminded everyone that power wasn't maintained by constant violence, but by the knowledge that consequences were inevitable and precise. The traitor's mistake rippled outward. Other potential informants reconsidered. Loose tongues grew cautious. The idea of selling Harlem out became far less attractive. Fear shifted back in the direction Bumpy intended, aimed not at the neighborhood, but at those who might think of undermining it. In the end, 3. The betrayal revealed something essential about Bumpy Johnson's world. 3. Strength wasn't just about dominance over enemies. It was about discipline within your own ranks. Harlem survived that moment not because it was united by love, but because it was held together by rules that everyone understood. And in that understanding, betrayal found no safe place to hide when the retaliation finally came. It didn't arrive the way everyone expected. There were no drive-by shootings lighting up Lenox Avenue. No bodies left in the open as warnings, no headlines screaming about gang warfare in Harlem. Instead, the response unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, like a tightening vice. People waited for gunfire and chaos, but what they got was something far more unsettling. The streets stayed calm, yet power began shifting beneath the surface, unnoticed by most until it was already too late. 3. Bumpy Johnson understood that public violence would only give his enemies what they wanted: attention, sympathy, and an excuse for the law to storm Harlem. He also knew that bullets created martyrs. Martyrs inspired replacements. So he chose a different path. He targeted foundations instead of faces, money instead of muscle, influence instead of anger. It was a strategy that required patience, reach. 3. And absolute confidence in his control over the city's invisible systems. Businesses connected to the lynching began to suffer first. Credit vanished overnight. Deliveries stopped showing up. Landlords suddenly enforced old clauses. Permits were questioned. Licenses delayed. What looked like bad luck was actually coordination. Bumpy didn't need to threaten anyone directly. He only needed to remind certain people who made the phone calls that mattered. A favor here, a reminder there. An entire operation started to suffocate. At the same time, information began to move. Not loudly, not recklessly. Envelopes changed hands. Names appeared in places they never should have. Quiet tips reached desks that usually stayed empty. The law, which had been blind days earlier, suddenly found its vision. Investigations opened. Records were reviewed. Patterns emerged. Men who thought they were untouchable discovered that protection had limits when too much light was shined in the wrong places. The brilliance of it was that nothing could be traced back to Bumpy directly. No witnesses could point to him. No orders were overheard. No guns tied to his men. Yet everyone involved understood exactly why it was happening. That understanding was the real punishment. They knew this wasn't coincidence. It was judgment delivered without emotion, without haste, and without mercy. Fear spread in a new form. It wasn't the fear of sudden death. It was the fear of slow collapse, of waking up each morning to find another door closed, another alley gone, another problem that couldn't be fixed with money or threats. That kind of fear lingered. It followed men home. It crept into their sleep. It made them paranoid, desperate, careless. Some tried to fight back. They made calls of their own. They searched for leverage. But they quickly realized the imbalance. 3. Bumpy's network was deeper than they imagined. His reach extended into places they had never been invited. Judges, businessmen, union bosses, and politicians might not have worked for him. 3. But they knew when to stay out of his way. Silence from those circles was its own kind of verdict. 3. The absence of public violence confused outsiders. Reporters sensed something had happened, but couldn't point to a single moment. There was no explosion, no defining scene to capture on camera. Harlem simply changed. Certain faces disappeared. Certain names stopped being spoken. Certain groups never returned. The neighborhood absorbed the shift quietly, like a body healing around a wound. For the people of Harlem, this kind of revenge carried a strange comfort. It meant the streets didn't burn. Children weren't caught in crossfire. Daily life continued. Yet beneath that normalcy was a renewed understanding of boundaries. Everyone knew there were lines that could not be crossed, and consequences that did not require spectacle to be devastating. Bumpy Johnson's greatest statement wasn't written in blood. It was written in absence. In the men who never came back. In the power structures that quietly realigned. 3. In the way the KKK's presence dissolved without confrontation, as if Harlem itself had rejected them. That was the true explosion, not a moment, but a transformation. By choosing control over chaos, Bumpy redefined what retaliation looked like. He proved that dominance didn't need noise, and justice in his world didn't need permission. 3. His enemies learned that survival depended not on who could shoot first. 3. But on who understood the game deeply enough to end it, without pulling a single public trigger. And in Harlem, 3. That lesson lasted far longer than any echo of gunfire ever could.